Hi ladies, this is going to be the answers to homework number 6. So please make sure you have homework 6 out as well as your textbook. Um, Textbook should be turned to page 196 because I can refer to that from time to time. Question number 1, homework number 6. Aside from religious reasons, A, why did many settlers leave the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 1630s, and where did they go? So what we need to remember is that most of these settlers were farmers, and they left, in this case, in the 1630s, they left the Massachusetts Bay Colony because they wanted to leave the rocky fields and find better farmland. So where did they go? Second part, they moved into the fertile Connecticut River Valley, and that was right there on page 196. Question number 2, who was Thomas Hooker, and why had he left the Massachusetts Bay Colony? Well, Thomas Hooker was, yes, he was a settler, which some people stopped there, but the more important point was that he was a minister. And he left the Massachusetts Bay Colony, frankly, because he didn't like the way the colony's Puritan leaders tried to influence the lives of the colonists. As we've heard time and again, the Puritan leaders, it was their way or the highway. And so Hooker said, I'll take the highway. Question number 3. What settlement did he found? And joining Windsor and Wethersfield, what did they unite to become? So the question is asking, where did Hooker go? And this is going to be an answer that I want to kind of sidetrack here for a second. He, on page 197, many of his followers went with him to the Connecticut River Valley, where they founded the settlement of Hartford. They didn't find the settlement of Hartford. That would have meant the settlement was already there, and they founded. He founded the village of Hartford. So founded means to found, to be the one to begin a village or a settlement in this case. If they had found it, it would have already been there. And a lot of people made that mistake, and so I wanted to clarify that on the video. So he founded the settlement of Hartford, and then later on they joined the villages of Windsor and Wethersfield, and they united to eventually become the Connecticut colony. So question number 4. What did Hooker speak about in 1638, and to what did this eventually lead? What was Hooker? He was a minister. And so, what did he speak about in 1638 in page 197? In 1638, Hooker preached a sermon calling for a government that would be based on the consent of the people. So, the question was, what did he speak about? And some of your answers were, he spoke about a sermon, which didn't make sense. He spoke about, in his sermon, a government that would be based on the consent of the people. And to what did this eventually lead? Well, eventually, in 1639, the colony adopted his idea. Some of you stopped there. The whole idea was, his idea was what eventually became known as the Fundamental Orders. Fundamental means basic, and so the Fundamental Orders were the first written plan of government in North America. That's important. As it turns out, these Fundamental Orders allowed Connecticut's voters, all landowners, all men, to elect their leaders. Now, obviously, that was way before the times of suffrage, where women were pushing for the right to vote. So at this time, it was only male landowners. But this is important. It's the first time that in a plan for government in the United States, or what is now the United States and North America at the time, a plan where the people had a right to vote for what they believed in, for what they wanted. All right, question number 5. Summarize how the New Hampshire colony was formed. Be sure to include names and places. So when I ask for you to include names and places, I want to see some names and places because those are important. And the book on page 197 gave you these answers. A permanent settlement was formed in the 1620s. In 1623, David Thompson founded the settlement. In 1630, the settlement moved to a site near thick trees and wild berries, which is kind of an interesting detail for them to include in the book. But thick trees and wild berries where the settlement was renamed Strawberry Bank. In 1679, the Strawberry Bank and other settlements were united under a charter from King Charles II, and that was the beginnings of the New Hampshire colony. So rewind that, go back, make sure you have all of those parts of this, because that is how the New Hampshire colony was formed. Number 6. What was the primary reason for the Pequot War and other conflicts? And so on page 198, we move into the Indian Wars. What was the primary reason for the Pequot War and other conflicts? It was all about land ownership. It was all about these colonists coming in and taking the land from the Indians. And the Pequot Indians, frankly, had enough. They were one of the groups that just stood up and fought. Most of the Indian tribes at some point did. But the primary reason for the Pequot War and other conflicts? Land ownership. Number 7. What was the misunderstanding between several tribes and the English over selling and owning land? Several people had some confusion on this, and so this is the answer that I want you to be sure to have. The misunderstanding between the several tribes and the English over selling and owning land was that when land was sold to settlers, the Indians didn't quite get the concept of selling it. They thought they were agreeing to share the land. So what was the misunderstanding? They thought they were going to share the land. You have to actually include in your answer what the English thought. The English thought that when they bought the land, the Indians were going to clear out. They were going to leave the land because they sold it. The Indians didn't quite get that concept, and obviously it led to some serious problems. Question number 8. Who was Metacomet, and who was his father? Studied earlier in this year, I put in the question. So Metacomet, I don't want you to just tell me that he was the son of Massasoit, which turns out who he was, but he was the leader of the Wampanoags Indians. And so it's important that you include in your answer that Metacomet was the leader of the Wampanoags. He was known to the English as King Philip. He was not actually a king. He was not the King of England, as some people put in their answers. He was known by the English as King Philip. And who was his father? Massasoit. And I just wanted you to mention in there that we had talked about Massasoit before. He was one of the Indians that helped the early pilgrims when they first made land and had trouble during those first few winters. Number 9. Summarize the events leading up to King Philip's War. Now, of course, in 1675, and I'm reading from page 198, there were bad feelings between the Indians and the settlers because of land ownership, and that's what started the war. However, I asked you, summarize the events leading up to the war, King Philip's War. And on page 199, we're told the war began when the Indians attacked and destroyed the town of Swansea. To get back at the Indian settlers destroyed a nearby Indian village and took the Indians' lands. And this is what began the wars. It spread quickly all over New England. Question number 10. As a result of this war, what four, and I have to be honest, in the question I put states. These were not states yet. What four colonies became part of New England as a result of this war? And I'm going to just look on page 199 because others moved even farther north into areas of present-day Vermont, northern New Hampshire, and Maine. Now, we already have known that Massachusetts was one of the colonies, and so these are the four that we're looking for: Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So those were the 4 colonies that all became part of New England as a result of the war with the Indians. And finally, question number 11, and I apologize for the whistling going on in the background. That was my text going off. Number 11, what did the New England frontier separate? We know a frontier is a land that lies beyond settled areas, and so the New England frontier separated the land settled by the Europeans, the English, from the land lived on by the Native Americans. And so that was what the New England frontier separated. All right, I will talk to you again in the morning. Thanks.